We are, as a people, inherently and historically opposed to secret society, opposed to secret oaths, opposed to secret proceedings, secret proceedings. No official of my administration, whether his rank is high or low, should interpret my words here tonight as an excuse to censor the news, to stifle dissent, to cover up our mistakes, or to withhold from the press and the public the facts they deserve to know.
Welcome to Conspiracy Corner Podcast, everyone. This is Abe, your host. It is 4:11 a.m., February the 1st. Been gone for 6 days because it has been a hell of a 6 days. Basically, we had a pretty heavy snow here in Kentucky. So I've been having to take the long way to and from work. First day of the snow, I should have called in, is what I should have did. Barely got to work on time. Had to drive 30 all the way there, take the long stretch from Harrodsburg to Danville to Nicholasville, after going through Garrett County. Then, on the way home, I get a flat in the middle of, horrible weather. So I had to sit on the side of the road for 2 hours in the middle of the snow, waiting for a ride. My wife picks me up. I get home. But while I'm waiting, I can, change the car change the tire in the morning, or get it towed somewhere to get the tire changed. I have security lug nuts on the car, and I'm like, fuck. Hopefully I have the key still. I always keep the key in the center console. I make sure too. No key in there. So then, me and Sammy today had to go on a wild goose chase getting a key. We went to one store, they didn't have it. Went to the next store, they didn't have it. So we drive up to Nicholasville. We got one from someone for free. Turns out it was the wrong size, so then we had to get the next size down. Finally, we got it. I take it to the car because I got the jack, I got the key. I can't break the lug nuts. So I'm like, well, fuck. So we have to get it towed. We don't want to get it towed to Walmart because Walmart won't change tires if you're missing lug nuts. Both my back tires are missing lug nuts. The tire on the left in the back is missing, the stud stripped. So I'm like, well, I can't take it to Walmart. I'm like, hopefully we can take it somewhere, get it towed somewhere to where they're just not going to freak out and they're going to actually change the tires. So we take it to a Cartwright, and come to find out, after looking at everything, brakes and rotors and fixing the studs and lug nuts and all that jazz. Turns out I need all 4 tires done. Basically, a bunch of shit done on it, so $1,300 worth. Which I'm fine with it. I work hard. I save up my money for shit like this when shit like this happens. But that's what I've been dealing with, what's been going on for the past 3 or 4 days. Been crazy. So that's where I've been. That's what I've been doing. As far as an update, that's about it. We haven't really covered a paranormal story in a while, so we're going to cover that. But hope you enjoy. The rep rope rates. Americana of the Dives and Highways. Bella Rawhide and Timber Kate. Spokane and Carson City, 1880. In all the annals of debauchery, in roistering gold cast gambling dens, in roaring mining town saloons, none glares more outrageously, albeit sometimes humorously, than the saga of two sisters, Bella Rawhide and Timber Kate. This glittering pair were known from Spokane to Santa Fe, except for a 10-year interval, when Bella, after a mighty battle with Timber, went to Carson City and ran a whorehouse of her own. They were almost inseparable. For some years during the split-up, Timber Kate, a gigantically tall woman of great strength, worked on her con game alone. An unusual feature of her approach was her use of haymakers, which she employed in place of the knockout drops usually administered to male clients by harlots. The punch in the jaw that Timber Kate delivered at the drop of the hat was never equaled, or so the receiver said, by any pugilist before or since. Whether these girls were actually blood sisters or not doesn't signify. Sister acts on the stages of saloons and bawdy houses demonstrates were their style. It was in the cards that those two should claim to be sisters. In Bella's last days, when she was never sober and all her mottled past rose up to confront her, she would, when on the verge of delirium tremens, shout to all and sundry that Timber Kate was not her sister at all, but her mother. "The big old soul," Bella would cry. "She set me to work in the mining camps when I was a brat. I supported her for years. Rot her. Let me at her. Where is she?" Then a wild chase would ensue, ending usually in bloody heads and broken bottles. The first time Bella Rawhide and Timber Kate danced in a saloon in Spokane, not only the floorboards sagged, but the rafters rang with the tumult of the sound from their combined voices. Timber roared like a bull and Bella screeched like a chimpanzee. Such caterwauling had never been heard before, even in the roughest dives, and the robust characters who frequented these dens loved it. Overnight, this pair of females in red tights and gold spangles made a tremendous hit. The songs they sang were for men only, and their nightly performance on the boards, the vitality of their behavior on the mattresses, was unique. No doubt about it, Bella and Timber were the rage. Bella, medium-sized, natural honey blonde, had big, bulging blue eyes and a loose-lipped mouth. Timber Kate, who stood 6'6" in bare feet, was muscular as a stevedore and as raucous a voice. She spotted an unruly shock of car-rot red curls, and her eyes, which were muddy brown, had a hard gleam in their depths. The one feature that the two had in common was the mouth. Loose and big in Bella's face, in Timber's it opened like an immense gulch. The way the sisters differed most was in temper. Bella, during most of her life, was as agreeable as a sunny May morning, with a wide smile of welcome for all men and most women. Timber Kate was a horse of another color. She hated everybody, or so she liked to yell. "Bring 'em on, the bastards, stand 'em up, and Timber'll knock 'em down so fast it'll make your hair curl." A fight was what Timber was on the lookout for, 24 hours a day. Nevertheless, she proved to be a good businesswoman, in contrast to Bella, who was the prize pushover. "I always get their money first, before I'll hang them on their shadow with my special punch I'll never lose," Timber said. Up and down the trails following the prospectors' towns, Bella and Timber rolled. Towns that were built in a day blared forth in improbable prosperity for a while, and became ghost towns as quickly as they had risen. Bella and Timber were always in demand, because they had an original viewpoint in entertainment. Just before their 10-year separation, Bella staged a dance that sent the audience wild. She came on stage clothed in a green spangle, fig leaves, and nothing else. For a small pouch of gold dust, a man could remove a spangle leaf. The fellow who removed the last leaf could carry her off to bed. The finale of this dance, called Eve's Leaves, was the high note in border entertainment. For the most part, Timber did not care for men. She made no bones about it. Prostitution was her trade. Same as a dishwasher, she would say. Nobody rightly likes to wash greasy dishes, but it's a living. Same way I feel about whoring. Then came Tug Daniels on the scene. The guffaws that were raised on his appearance at the Red Shiner Saloon in Phoenix rang loud and clear until, in surprise move, he drilled a prospector in the shoulder. "Just for quiet, you understand," said Tug, a little, weaselly, bow-legged critter from nowhere. Nobody knew him or had ever heard anything about him. He dressed in the garish style often affected by the half-breed Mexican pimps who trafficked in Carson City and Butte, and as far west as Spokane. Rat-faced, lank black hair worn in greasy, pointed sideburns, a mouthful of ragged yellow teeth, and a leathery yellow skin riddled with pockmarks added little to his charm. One feature, however, arrested the beholder: huge liquid brown eyes, the eyes of a love-stick Mexican senorita. Tug was not one to neglect the value of the romantic eyes he had inherited from his Mexican mother. He used them as the cobra used its forked tongue. Tug was a killer, but he took what he wanted first. He had heard by the desert grapevine that Bella and Timber were rich from a long, highly successful career. He proposed to take them one at a time. What he did not bank on was that both women would fall for him, one with a young girl's romantic enthusiasm, the other with the venomous passion. That Bella should succumb to Tug's weedy, masculine charms was not too surprising, but it was Timber, 3/4 masculine and wary as a badger, who went after him whole hog. From the first, her livid jealousy was apparent when Tug Daniels decided to seduce Bella first and paid her to open court. Timber raged in anger. A few nights after Tug's arrival at the Red Shiner, he danced with Bella, who had dressed the part of an enchantress to the hilt. In bright purple satin looped with orange silk poppies, she filled the eye to overflowing. Tug grasped her by both hips and sailed out onto the dance floor. Timber, who was sitting at a side table tossing off straight whiskeys with the regularity of the drummer's beat, finally blew her top. Leaping up, she pushed Tug aside and grabbed Bella by the throat. Such a public trouncing as she gave Bella had not been seen in many moons, certainly not administering by one woman to another. With a final fling, Timber Kate tossed Bella, now unconscious, against the wall and ran up the stairs to her room, roaring, "Don't no damn skunk of a man follow me, do you hear? I'm closed for the night." The aftermath of this affair was Bella's departure for Carson City, accompanied by Tug Daniels. With her savings, she bought and ran a fancy bawdy house, the Beehive, in the red light district of the railroad junction for a while. Tug lived off Bella, but eventually, as she had suspected he would happen, he ran off with her money box. From the time of the quarrel between the sisters, Timber began to disintegrate. She took up with 2 or 3 women of her kidney in various mining towns. But the originality of the sister act was no more. For a while, Timber dressed as a man, in white tights and leopard skin shirt, did a weightlifting act, but that did not take on because she raged against the razzing from bored onlookers. "Hey, big girl, strip," the men would yell. "Come on, sister, let's see what you've got there, where you ain't got what we got." The strongman act was a flop. Then one night, a huge woman dressed in a sombrero and doggy-skinned chaps arrived at the Beehive whorehouse on Quincy Street, Carson City. It was Timber Kate. She and Bella reconciled, and Timber asked to join the ranks of prostitutes in the fancy-priced Beehive. The next morning, a colored maid found the two stone drunk on the floor of Bella's room. But Timber's jealous rages flared high more and more often. Things were going from bad to worse at the Beehive when Tug again appeared on the scene. He couldn't have timed it better for a showdown. It was a Saturday night in the spring. The house, jammed at 10 o'clock, would be even fuller until dawn. Girls in thin wrappers with colored taffeta bows in their pompadours were running to and fro from the big mirrored parlor, as busy as the bees of the house was named for. "God, I'm dead on my feet already," chirped the blonde. "You'll be dead on your back before morning," answered a bald mulatto. Tug had not worn well with his trapezing. Neither had Bella, who was fat, rattled, and sloppy. And certainly Timber Kate was a scarecrow of her former magnificently upholstered self. The three gazed at each other. Timber made a lunge to hang one of her well-known haymakers on the little rat-like man. But Tug was too quick for her. His agility in pulling a knife was lightning swift. Before Timber knew what had hit her, he had ripped her belly wide open from crotch to navel. Screaming like a jackal, she fell like all the timber in the primeval forest of the world. She lay dying in a pool of blood as Tug smashed through a back window and made his escape. 2 years after this tragedy, Bella Rawhide shut herself into her room one night. In the morning, she was dead from a dose of cleaning fluid. In the days when Bella Rawhide and her sister Timber Kate were working their act, it was always Timber who went around the towns where they played, putting up posters. The favorite with the public seemed to be the one depicting an enormous Timber in red tights and gold spangles, holding Bella dressed as a pink rose in the palm of her outstretched hand. And you'll see that if you're watching on YouTube. After the deaths of the two women, these posters began to turn up on walls of buildings in Carson City, Cheyenne, Butte, and Spokane, all cities that had given the sisters welcome. One night, the owner of a tobacco store situated on a corner in Carson City shut up shop rather later than usual. As he turned the corner, he became conscious of a figure of immense height standing outside the side wall, a large, windowless brick surface. He moved forward cautiously and saw that it was a woman in a short skirt, high western boots, and a sombrero. Busily engaged in pasting a poster on the wall, when the man approached, the woman faded into the night. Amazed, he stood looking at the poster. It was a vivid advertisement of a musical act by Bella Rawhide and Timber Kate. The man started to peel the poster from the wall, but stopped decisively by a tremendous blow on the back of his neck. Hours afterward, he was found, still unconscious, lying where he had been struck down. Another report of the apparition of Timber Kate comes from Washington State, in a former mining town near Spokane. There's a building that was, at one time, the local opera house. Old newspapers show that the building had previously been a famous honky-tonk. One night, a caretaker saw two women, one very tall and the other of medium size, dancing on the bare stage. The tall one was dressed in scarlet tights and spangles. The other, in a gaudy pink ruffles, would leap up onto the palm of the hand of the woman in red. The caretaker switched on the lights, and the pair immediately disappeared. Many times in the slums of Carson City, people tell of having seen a fat, bloated woman in a ragged white nightgown stumbling along the streets. The creature seems in agony, clawing at her mouth and throat. She staggers along and slips into a dark doorway out of sight. Timber Kate, always the stronger of the sisters, pursues the activities she pursued in life. Poor Bella concentrates on her last agonized moments, which she spent alone, behind locked doors, in her busy beehive. Tall spendthrift, short miser, thin murderer, fat thief. This is Vermont, 1830. Had Bella Rawhide and her sister Timber Kate lived at the time of the four characters whose story I am about to relate, the six would have made a fabulous group in a flashing underworld history. Brilliant in body as were the sisters, these four rapscallions, Terence Blunt, Andrew Marr, Cal Longstreet, and Frank Ballard, did much to secure the honors for vice and skullduggery in the field of masculine effort. Perhaps they had become acquainted by now in some plushy glade of space, call it hell, time, middle mist, or even purgatory, where the damned are supposed to writhe. All six met sudden deaths, all were pitched, agonizingly, into eternity. The lot of them had much in common. Somewhere about 1820, a tall, exquisitely dressed young man named Terence Blunt stole $10,000 from his father in Baton Rouge. In the dead of night, he lit out from under the white-pillared portico of his birthplace, a mansion called Melbourne, and his father never saw him again. Around this time, a short, thick-set card-sharp, one Andrew Marr, of Scottish descent, buried a fortune in ill-gotten gains, mostly from cheating at cards or swindling gullible note-signers, in a woods near Rochester, New York. Then he too set out on an uncharted journey. Perhaps it was on the same night, or close to it, that a beautiful woman was murdered in San Francisco. The murderer, a cadaverously thin man with the face of Botticelli angel, was Calvin Longstreet. Some years before, his mother had been the most talked-of actress in London. But Cal was obsessed by the desire to kill. One night, after the opening of her most successful play, La Salle Longstreet, as she was known to London audiences, retired, somewhat fatigued, to bed. During the night, her 20-year-old son strangled her with a silk scarf. Why? No reason. He just had to kill beautiful females. After robbing his mother's purse of money for flirt to a new country, he had left the house. The San Francisco murder was one of a series, for which he had never been caught. Not long after, an innkeeper by the name of Monroe in Des Moines was putting his day's receipts away when he was set upon and beaten by a masked intruder, Frank Ballard, who had slipped in by a cellar window. For all his fatness, no thief could gain interest to inns, farmhouses, or city mansions with the cleverness of Fat Frank, as his cronies called him. Fat Frank was a mongrel. Ballard was not his name. He never had known a surname. Once in Kentucky, when he robbed the office of a feed store, he had hastily crammed his loot into a sack. The next morning, gliding down the Ohio River in a cat canoe, he had noticed the name in red letters stenciled on the bag, and decided that since it sounded highfalutin, he'd take it. He was Frank Ballard from then on. Slowly, each in his own way, leaving a trail of disaster in his wake, these four retrobates were converging on one spot in the Green Mountain state of Vermont. The fates did not hurry them. Over a period of 15 years, the four men were played on invisible lines. Like trout in a sun-dappled stream, the lines, strong as spider gossamer, formed a web of immersed scope. From state to state, city to city, the men wove their pernicious ways. News did not travel fast in the days before transcontinental railways and the telegraph, but travelers by stagecoach or riders carrying bulletins and letters in saddlebags spread news of robberies, satanic murders, swindles on a grand scale, and the antics of a handsome fellow who gambled for high stakes and then, in one fell swoop, spent the proceeds entertaining some enchantress. Terence Blunt raised his aching head from a silk pillow in the bridal suite of Sanderson's Hotel in Toledo. He had gambled extravagantly the night before. In 2 days his winnings would be spent. What matter? Terence rolled his long, lithe body across the bed and took the golden-haired girl lying next to him in his arms, kissing her awake. "Oh, hello," she said. "Say, what's your name? You never told me." With a rather shaky finger he jiggled the diamonds of a necklace, which at the moment was all she wore. "Good stones, Terence." Terence kissed her eyelids. "Cost a hell of a lot of cash, these sparkles." "Let's see if you're worth it." In an office on a dingy street in Cleveland, Andrew Marr pocketed a fat roll of currency, stuffing it into his greatcoat pocket. He looked coldly at the shivering man who stood spread-eagle against the wall of a room. Andrew said in a low voice, "I told you I'd be back for my cut, you foolish ape. If I wasn't so good-natured, you'd know you might get hurt." The other man seemed to regain control of himself for a minute. "I won't set no more stores afire, Saturday nor any other day," he shouted. "What do I get out of it? You get it all in the end. Besides, 3 fires in a month is too much. The sheriff's—" Andrew hit the man across the mouth. "You'll do as I say. You'll set that fire Saturday." He patted the roll of bills into his pocket, slammed the door, and walked importantly down the street. "Rotten miser, miser, miser," shouted the man. A beautiful woman named Frances Norfield, riding in a Victoria along the river road near Holyoke, wondered if the young man had met at the party the night before would call on her as he had promised. Longstreet, wasn't that his name? So tall and thin, but such a beautiful head, like pictures of Shelley and Byron, and his voice and manner were so arresting. A bit theatrical, perhaps, but a delightful change. As the coachman turned the team in to the driveway of Rosemont, her home, she sighed. "Perhaps I've made a conquest. Oh, I do hope he comes." After a salutatory supper off a tray in her boudoir, Mrs. Norfield, gleaming exquisitely in a rosy chiffon peignoir, with fresh lilacs in her ash-blonde hair, settled down to read. Shortly, a maid entered and announced, "Mr. Longstreet, madam," and her smiling admirer arrived. About 2 o'clock in the morning, he left via a French window and was soon swallowed up in the foliage of the spruce grove bordering Frances Norfield's garden. Or rather, the late Frances Norfield, for the next morning when the maid brought in her mistress's morning chocolate, she stumbled over the body of the once lovely Frances, purple in face, tongue protruding from gaping lips, strangled with a thin silk scarf. "Damn it, I'm getting old and fatter. I've got to be careful." Frank Ballard had just had a narrow escape. As he had shinnied down a wisteria vine from a third-story window, a shot from above had drilled his hat brim. Dropping a third of the distance, he wrenched his ankle and hobbled painfully into the shadow of the same rocks piled close to the house. A few days before, Frank Ballard had put in at Newburyport, Norfolk, had become too hot for safety. 4 robberies in a row, but only one worthwhile. Now this big house near Exeter had paid well. The silver and jewels in the canvas bag had dragged after him would realize a sizable amount. But he did not like these close calls. Ballard removed the black felt hat. Sticking his forefinger through the bullet hole, he muttered, "No sirree, might have been my head. Better do the county fair in Vermont quieter for a while." In the years before the war between the states, the country fair attracted people from far and near. It was held in the environs of St. Johnsbury, in a spot that was salubrious, enhanced by mountain air and scent of clovered pasture lands, as an old handbill puts it. The fair had started after the Revolution as cattle drovers gathering and the Harvest Festival, which took place at the same time in Montpellier, was invited to amalgamate. The combined festivity caught the imagination of the public. Crowds came from many states to enjoy the horse racing, the competitions for needlework, baking and canning, the flower displays, the dressmaking contest, and all the other events that combined the form a week of intense activity. Every domesticated animal in the roster competed for prizes. Midway and circus acts did a roaring business. Con games, which usually break out where crowds gathered, flourished. The fair and its varied attractions acted as a magnet for our fine feathered friends, spendthrift, miser, murderer, thief. The first year, fat Frank Ballard honored the fair with his presence. He met Andrew Marr. A kind of wary friendship sprang up between the two men, and they laid out a campaign for the winter. During the following months, the number of crimes committed in this rich farming community rose in a number and daring. Many travelers and vagrants used the high road from the Hudson River Valley along the Connecticut River and so into Canada. No one took particular notice of 2 affable strangers who appeared now and again in Waterford, St. Johnsbury, and smaller villages. On frosty winter nights, Fat Frank and Andrew would sit companionably around fireplaces or pot-bellied stoves and regale listeners with tales of adventure. They would be surveying for the government, so they said, as soon as the weather permitted. Spring came, and summer. Again, the multicolored banners at the fair fluttered against mountains of cerulean skies. Carl Longstreet, sitting in the wide veranda of a hotel in Albany, read an account of the gala opening the fair in his morning paper. His lips curled, and his eyes narrowed in expectation. There should be lots of beautiful women wandering about the grounds, he said to himself. Huge crowds of them, young, fresh, bosomed, dewy-eyed. I must saddle my horse for Vermont. Somewhere along the road near Rutland, Cal was joined by a stranger riding a bony nag. The fellow, who had seen far better days from the look of his threadbare, much-darned clothing, greeted Cal pleasantly. In an unmistakably southern drawl, he said, "G'day. Mind if I join you for a way? This paltry bit of crowbait made founder at any jog. The best I could rustle at the moment. Truth is, I've had devilish bad luck at cards lately. Lost my horse and trinkets last night. Well, better luck that I fare thy trust." And Terence Blunt shrugged his shoulders and urged his tottering steed forward. The web so expertly handled by the fates drew tighter. It would not be long now. People of the Vermont countryside remembered vividly for years the fatal week that followed the opening of the St. Johnsbury Fair. A wave of startling crimes washed over the green hills with such ferocity as to leave householders in villages and remote farmsteads alike, starkly silent with fear. Windows were being shuttered and doors barricaded as soon as darkness fell. Robberies were far flung. 3 young women among them, on Tessie Bowden, were found raped and murdered. Always a thin silk scarf had been used to throttle the life out of the victim. Sounds like the Boston Strangler. Fate finally pulled tight the strands of the web on a run-down Connecticut River farm a mile or so out of Waterford. Uriah Washburn, a dour religious fanatic, was the owner of the farm. He had delusions that he was Jehovah, sent to purge the world from sin and all its horrid manifestations. His ramshackled house, seemingly never to have known a lick of paint, reared its ugly gray bulk in a grove of ragged pines and poplar trees. Set back from the heavily rutted road that skirted the river, across from the house stood a huge red barn with a wide runaway straight through. The center of the hipped roof supported a windowed, hexagonal cupola. Far into the night, travelers by road, as well as farmers across the river, could see a light in the cupola. On quiet nights, the sound of hymns and prayers for deliverance from hell caused them to shake their heads. Uriah's crazy as an old coot, they said, and his boy Dabby ain't no better. But Dabby Washburn was different from his father. While Uriah let off religious fervor by song and preaching to the bats and night creatures, Dabby, a misshapen youth, had a club foot, took pride in his medicines, henbane and nightshade, deckroots and sassafras. He brewed them all over gypsy fire of sticks and walnut husk. One stormy night, 4 men, who had met at St. Johnsbury Fair, turned up in a covered wagon at Washburn Barn. The tallest asked Uriah to leave to stable his drenched pair of horses. "I'll pay you well for feed and blankets. If you can spare a few of us, we would be obliged. We've driven far today, and we must be early in the morning." The man took out crotcheted money pouch and chinked its contents. Uriah eyed the pouch. He liked money as well as the next man. "Reckon yes. Can't give you no food." He pocketed the pouch and climbed slowly into the cupola. Dabby acted as master of ceremonies. Would the men like some of his root beer? Well, they agreed, not just their tipple, but it would do. Dabble brought blankets, and as the 4 men, Terence, Frank, Cal, and Andrew, wrapped themselves in blankets and prepared to endure the hours until morning, Dabby went to a closet and filled 4 mugs with root beer. Deftly, so none would see, he added a dash of his brew. As the men drank, each in turn made some allusion to the bitter taste of the beer. "You don't say what root you made your beer of," Terence said, laughing. Andrew guzzled his. "Leetle, might tart. Maybe it's fermented. This hits the spot. I'll like a tang to a drink that hain't no other kick." And Fat Frank belched and held out his mug for more. Cal, the supercilious, drank his daintily. "I like a sweet drink. This is too bitter. By half for me." He found a darkened corner filled with straw and settled himself to sleep. The wind had risen to wild heights, scurrying sheets of rain among the pines and poplars, until a kind of damnation to all sinners weather rode the valley. According to the bang of religious zealots who had converted Uriah, the millennium would have accompanied by a hurricane and flood. Now Uriah, at his altar high above the roof, prayed and chanted to the wind in a thunderous voice. Dabby dozed in a corner. Then suddenly the henbane nightshade brew began to work in the entrails of the 4 blanketed men, who had fallen into fitful sleep on the straw. Fat Frank went first. 2 or 3 screeches, and his overworked heart heaved a final mighty thump. Terence leapt from his straw bed, clutching the air wildly, vomiting his life away. Andrew just curled into a ball of anguish and soon died. But Cal Longstreet, the delicate one, crawled on his knees to the feet of Dabby and groaned, "Why? Why did you do it?" Dabby answered, never raising a finger to help the wretched man, "'Cause I know who you are. I trailed you from the fair. I saw you kill Tessie Bowden. I loved her. She was kind to me. You're none of you any good. So I got you all. God'll reward me, like Pa always says. Hear him?" Cal sank dying to the fouled straw as the wind and Uriah's heavy-flung hallelujahs tore the night with clamor. Then Dabby did the thing he felt he must. In all the local stores and taverns, he had seen handbills announcing a reward for the most apprehension of the thieves who had wreaked such disaster across the state. The murder of Farmer Bowden's daughter had raised the temper of the countryside to fever pitch. Bring in the fiend, dead or alive, Dabby could not read, but the men who gathered in front of the posters, who had told him what the words meant. Back to the closet where he kept his poisoned root beer went Dabby, full of purpose. He picked out a coil of thick rope and cut 4 lengths. Carefully he knotted a noose about the neck of each grotesquely sprawled body. Dabby was far stronger than most would suspect, for he had plowed deep furrows in the hilly, rock-strewn pasture of the farm ever since he was a small boy. The muscles of his long arms stood out in cords as he lifted each body to hang from the star crossbeam that divided the barn in 2. In the half-darkness, his squinted eyes surveyed the dead quartet. The wind had lulled. It was near morning. He flung wide the big doors at either end of the long alley between the haylofts. Stopped dead in their tracks, the retrobates now hung like 4 black crows. And streamed bright morning sunrays, gilding the stained corpses and lending an ironical touch to the beauty of a newborn gentle day. Dabby heard the sound of footsteps dragging on the narrow stairs that wound up to the cupola. His arms folded across his chest, he waited. Uriah Washburn was so wearied by his night of fighting hell and brimstone that he did not see the swaying black figures hanging in a row from star pole. It was Dabby's voice, ringing like a trumpet, that roused the man. "There they be, 4 black skunks. The sheriff wanted 'em dead or alive." And the boy flung off down the path to the river. The ugly house in the grove of pines and poplar streets is long since fallen to ruin. Tangled vines and matted weeds cover the collapsed walls, but the old Washburn barn still stands. And sometimes, in the full of the moon, 4 draggled black figures are seen hanging from the star pole. It was on a September night of bright moonlight that I saw the ghost of the tall spendthrift, the short miser, and the thin murderer, and the fat thief, hanging like flap-winged, molten cranes in the shadowed barn. I was out walking along the roadway that passes the barn and chanced to look through the high doors. For a space of minutes I stood watching. Gently the forms swayed in a soft wind. The night was full of the sharp or blurred sounds so much a part of a farm countryside. But no animal of any kind stirred or whinnied or rustled among the straw, for no creature will stay in that barn. As I took one last look before continuing along the road toward Waterford, I noticed the thing that always interests me in supernatural phenomena. Although the brightness of the moon cast rich black shadows from the barrels of piled straw on the barn floor, no shadow lay under the hanging figures.
We are, as a people, inherently and historically. Opposed to secret society. Opposed to secret oaths. Opposed to secret proceedings. Secret proceedings. No official of my administration, whether his rank is high or low, should interpret my words here tonight as an excuse to censor the news, to stifle dissent, to cover up our mistakes, or to withhold from the press and the public the facts they deserve to know.